Okay, so welcome to our IPv6 panel, and hopefully to create some discussion at the end because we have lots of time now. Okay, so I will introduce the panelists, and Bartosz has some short presentation, so I will introduce him last. I'm Žorž, the guy from before, if you remember. We have Ian Ferrer from Deutsche Telecom. We saw his brilliant presentation about TerraStream in the morning. I think it's a really good idea and really good step forward toward IPv6. And Chris Grundemann, the new director, in his previous life, he was with Cable Labs, and he was standardizing many IPv6 things and so on and so forth. Then we have Bartosz Gajda from PIONIER and Krzysztof Siliki from NASK. And I would just like to ask Bartosz to present his few slides, and then we go back into the questions for the session. So let me see if I can work this out. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Just a very short presentation from my side. We are operator. Poznań Supercomputing Networking Center is operator of Polish NRN research and networking research network in Poland, and we as operator are not doing things concerning IPv6 behind a curtain. So I'd like to display something, just a few examples of what we have done. So first of all, we started quite early as it was possible, because our main upstream provider, which is JANT, European Network, has been IPv6 enabled since 2003, and since that time we also became IPv6 enabled. Of course, it was not just like that, so we need to be prepared. We needed some time. And about a year ago, year before, we started doing things on a production level in our network in the city in Poznań. So it gave us some experience. And it is also worth to mention that DNS in Poland was IPv6 enabled since 2005, thanks to NASK operator. Pioneer network is a backbone network. It means that we do not provide addresses. We provide connectivity for the cities in Poland, for academic, for universities, and in each of the cities there are different operators, which usually are LAR registered in RIPE, so they should to get their own address spaces. And as you can see on this map, most of the cities, and even more than displayed, because the slide is a little bit old, have their own IPv6 addresses. But these are addresses. The question may be about services, and this is a different story. I can say a few things about a city in Poznań. So, there was also a nice presentation about users and content. So we are providing connectivity, but we are also a little bit providing the content. So we are acting on two sides. As an example of providing content, in Poznań there is a very big website, which is official website for the Poznań city, and it is quite a huge number of visits, about 10 million visits per month, and it is main place for all information about the city, what's going on. And just before 2011, we wanted to enable IPv6 there, and we hopefully managed. It was not easy, but we did it. Just after it, we discovered that the volume of traffic was quite low, mainly bots, and about 5,000 of requested. counted a few months after it. But it's working. Of course, what was the conclusion after such implementation? There were some issues about firewalls. Not everything was fine, so we had to implement a different firewall for this service. But we thought that it shouldn't be a big problem because the volume of traffic is quite low, so even a different server should do it well. And also some changes in web applications inside. And maybe you can think about the question how to get customers for such content, or how to get customers for IPv6. And I can provide you an answer just on the next slides. Because we are also providing a network for free in Poznań, which is wireless network in the city center. And we also, because we are a part of, we are as a company, as a PSNC, we're responsible for some part of technical side of this implementation. So we wanted to, of course, make IPv6 enable there, and even IPv6 only enable, and dual stock, of course. So this network is now running, but it's only currently a pilot network, but has IPv6 inside. What we learned from that? There were some issues, of course. Again, about firewalls, not everything was working, even a big company with big names, but it concerns mainly DHCP servers. So DHCP v6 server from Checkpoint was not working well. And also what was mentioned before on the presentations, that there are some problems with clients, especially mobile clients. So Windows Mobile is not working well, and also Android. And we can't fix it because this is not our part. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for this. So I will try to switch back to my presentation. Let's see how that works. So, can you tell the other panelists, can you tell us a bit about yourself, what you have been doing on IPv6? Ian?
Sorry? Hello, is this thing? Yeah, it sounds like it's working. I mean, my presentation this morning, I think, covered most of the things, but I didn't really introduce myself when I started that. So I've been with Deutsche Telecom for about 14 years in one form or another. But the last couple of years, we've been working exclusively on the development of this TerraStream architecture, which is, you know, a native v6 network. I think at that stage, I was pretty new to v6 myself. You know, I mean, it's something that we've been talking about. I've been running RFQs, selecting hardware since 2000, 2001 that we've had requirements in there for, but, you know, not something that we have ever really taken that seriously, I think, until recently. And, you know, I mean, hopefully what you saw from what I was talking about this morning, we flipped 180 degrees. It's not a case of saying, well, maybe we'll pop a bit of V6 on top, maybe a bit of dual stack, you know, the softly approach. We're going the other way of saying, if you're going to do it properly. And, you know, that's kind of, you know, one of the design principles that we're following now.
So yes, I'm Chris Grundemann. Now I work at the Internet Society. But before that, I worked at Cable Labs, where I led the IPv6 project there, which was basically doing a couple of things. One was updating all of the cable-specific specifications to include IPv6 support. And the other thing was running through the cable network kind of soup to nuts to determine exactly where a migration to IPv6 or even just turning on IPv6 touches things. Because obviously it's not just data services, right? I mean, if you're doing anything else with IP, there's involvement there. So there's a lot of touch points. So looking at kind of holistically across the cable industry, what does it take to turn IPv6 on? And then watching and coaching companies turn it on. And before that, I was at TW Telecom, where we rolled out V6, basically 6PE, which is super simple to do if you're already tunneling all your traffic. Adding V6 is trivial, back in like 2007, 2008.
And now HomeNet, HipNet is a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things we found, at least within the cable space and within the US, North America in general, I think Canada has the same problem, is that most of the residential broadband providers historically have not provided CPE. So everything's kind of bring your own. DSL is a little bit, has handed out more routers than cable guys have, but cable specifically has almost never handed out anything other than just the cable modem. So the router and everything else was brought by the subscriber, and that becomes a major problem when less than 10% of the routers available for sale today support IPv6. So you can turn IPv6 on in your network, and it goes nowhere, right? It just hits that wall at the end of the customer's home where their old router is sitting there. People leave those in for 5, 10 years. So yeah, so then that shifted my focus to home networking from the IPv6 angle, and was working on that for the last year or so, looking at, what does the home network of the future look like, and IPv6 I think is the pillars that hold that network up.
Okay, thank you. Krzysztof.
Okay, my name is Krzysztof Siliki. I'm working for NASK for a long time. I was 13 years technical director. Now I'm focusing on security, area security aspects. I'm also working for NISA. NISA is a European Network and Information Security Agency, so I am in the management board. So IPv6 is for me is just another area of concern from the security point of view, as all emerging technologies which are coming, which are developing, should be the point of concern for everybody, how to implement in a resilient and secure way.
Thank you. So I think we can go to the first question. Let's do a bit of status updates. What's going on in your country or region? What do you see as a status and level of IPv6 implementation around? I know that Sander did a report in this, but I would like to hear from you that come from different regions. Should we go like before?
Yeah, if you like. So, I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, Sander's presentation about, the take-up probably quantifies things better than I can. But I mean, within the German market, which is, where I live and where I have the most personal experience from, both as an operator and as a customer, I've been quite surprised recently. I mean, I have a contract with Net Cologne, and quite recently they've launched a trial completely unsolicited, but that popped in, and I was surprised. I was surprised that was that they're actually sort of grabbing hold of this. Previously, before that, 6SX and however you pronounce it. There's the services there. So I mean, the stuff is there if you want to take hold of it. We're seeing the content come and what have you, but I don't think there's really the global pull towards it, or even a national pull towards it at this stage. I think it's one of those things that probably it's going to happen by attrition. Customers are going to get it without knowing it, and they're going to use it without knowing it.
So
rather than actually people pulling it and saying, I want it.
If the customer gets it and not notice it, that means we did our job well.
Completely agree. That is the absolute goal. If as soon as you notice it, or as soon as you have to do something to enable it, you have to do anything different. Yeah, you've probably failed.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so I think one of the big issues, at least in North America and in the U.S. in particular, is what we talked about, which was CPE. When you're talking about 100, 200, 300 million subscribers across the entire country of the U.S., and you've got Canada and everything on top of that, replacing CPEs becomes a major issue, and people just don't do it on their own. So that's been one of the things that's just kind of dragging along. I think we're in a place now where the CPE manufacturers have kind of woken up to the idea that we really need to add IPv6 to our products. And so as we go forward, as those product replacement cycles happen, I think we'll see it through attrition as well. Because a lot of the providers have started turning it on. In large cases for the same scale problems, where when you have these massive networks and you've got, again, tens of millions of nodes on your network, just management of those devices becomes almost impossible with at least private IPv4 space, and public IPv4 space, again, being more useful for customers, doesn't want to get used there. So I think again, same thing, attrition, we'll kind of see that start going. Obviously the mobile carriers are starting to pave the way a little bit. Verizon's kind of jumped ahead as far as US companies with their LTE rollout. Just now all of a sudden we have IPv6. And so it just hadn't happening. So I think I definitely see that happening across the board where, it's not something anyone's ever going to ask for, and there's still a business case problem, especially at the enterprise level and some of the maybe smaller ISPs, smaller content guys, where putting out money to deploy IPv6 today is not going to increase your margins tomorrow. And so because of that, right, we've seen a lot of folks hold back and wait, and that's why we're at where we're at, now 15 years later. But obviously, through what we've seen and what Sander presented, right, the big guys, Google, Facebook, AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, those major companies that have to think a little bit more strategically and have to look out, 5, 10 years in the future because they can't move fast enough to not do that. The fact that they're deploying IPv6 and are doing it kind of across the board is a really good sign, and I take heart from that. So all the percentages are still low as far as usage. We've definitely seen some big steps being made in the last couple of years.
So I heard from JJB from Comcast that he's enabling millions of customers monthly.
Yeah.
So I think that is going pretty rapidly out. Do you have any recent information on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so cable companies have a kind of an advantage in the residential market because Docsis 3.0 implemented IPv6 in the spec as, when it was written in 2007. And what makes that nice is not that they thought of it to include IPv6 in 2007 necessarily, was the fact that today, cable companies are rolling out Docsis 3.0 because of a number of other benefits they get with it, right? So they're upgrading their entire systems because they want higher speeds to provide to their customers for the large part. And oh, by the way, you get IPv6 with that. So it's kind of nice that there actually becomes this business case where if you want to increase the speed to your customers, you roll out Docsis 3.0, now all of a sudden turning on v6 becomes fairly trivial, at least for the cable networks, right? So that was a good thing.
Can I pick up on that? I mean, this is something that I think is a fairly universal thing with the v6 story. How do you solve the CPE problem? Well, we tie that in with our fibre rollout. There's new CPEs going out anyway, so what do you know? You've got v6 on there, and you're saying the same with Docsis 3.0. And as long as when you have major network change wherever it is in the network, you use that as a catalyst and you ride v6 on top of that. And as long as you say this is what we're going to do, then you can avoid this whole business case discussion, which will almost certainly end in, well, we'll do nothing then.
Okay. Let's hear the update from Poland.
As I presented, we are offering IPv6 since 10 years, and I can see from my perspective, because I'm also personally responsible for a segment addresses for our customers, but our customers are academic customers and universities, so big customers, not end users. And I see that the level of, let's say, the last obstacle which was in the people has been changing. So people are more aware that IPv6 is not some future, but it should be going now. And to be more concrete, we enabled a few customers last years, Poznań University of Technology and different ones. So I can see a little progress, but it is not so big. On the other hand, I am still surprised how many obstacles and details we can overcome. I mean, in implementation, in the servers, in the firewalls, there are still some problems we have to fight to overcome, and it's not good from this perspective.
Okay, so Krzysztof, what are the telecoms doing here in Poland?
Well, as we have seen from the Sander statistics, there's
Close to zero.
much work to be done. And well, it's a good question. From time to time, the Polish NRA, National Regulatory Authority, have the seminars about the IPv6 development and so on. So during those seminars, you can learn that operators who are probably the most advanced in deploying the IPv6 are mobile operators, big names, mobile operators. Of course, on the other hand, you have the academic networks that are traditionally some step ahead, but it's the question of awareness of the users. So, but it's like this, that everybody is waiting to the last possible point to deploy, and this is because as Bartosz said, there are some technical problems, maybe there is no business cases, but what is important for smaller ISPs, this is the problem, because they have no business cases, they have no money, they have no budget to implement this. But on the other hand, those who are just starting the business, they have no choice because the IPv4 address space disappeared. So probably they are forced to implement IPv6 and then ask upstream providers to have a service.
So what's the name of that bird that sticks the head in the sand? So okay, let's move on to the next question. Actually, I picked two of Krzysztof's questions because I thought they were really, really good. So is there any expectation from operators or providers' view from implementing IPv6 in terms of network resilience and security? So.
This is a good question, and there is ENISA have done the survey a couple of years ago, it's 2009, among the operators and ISPs in Europe about what are their expectations from IPv6 development in terms of resilience and security. And the answer is, well, they are not expecting. They are not expecting that IPv6 development is a factor that can help them to have their networks more resilient, more secure, and so on.
So IPv6 is not more secure and not more resilient
than
IPv4?
We can't say that. And because the second observation, just reading this report, was that they, those operators are not aware of what can they have from what kind of new features or new possibilities they can have if they implement IPv6. So it's rather the gap between opportunities versus awareness.
Yes, and now IPsec is moved to should, so. Bartek, what do you think?
I think that there will be always a challenge if we are talking about security, and there is a long way ahead we have to cross to meet the challenge. I mean that everybody can find many reports saying that IPv6 has many cases which are not fully covered yet, but it shouldn't stop us with implementation. So what we can do, I think its best approach is to do step by step and be prepared what can happen.
Okay, Chris.
With regards to expectations of resiliency, I mean, I think that there's absolutely an expectation that, rolling out this new protocol, or if we're going to replace or even just stand beside IPv4, that it has to be at least comparable. And in a lot of cases, that hasn't been the case, which is probably another reason why we haven't seen, uptake in some areas, right? There's definitely folks who have gone to look at this, and mostly this was several years ago. Now, I think, again, we've seen a lot of change. I would say the last couple of years even have made things a lot better as far as product availability and having feature sets that are actually compatible between v4 and v6 in just, the routers and switches and firewalls you're putting on your network just couldn't secure v6 the way that they could with v4. So I think there's definitely an expectation that it needs to be there, and I think there may be a view that it's not there, which may be causing some of the friction, absolutely. One of the other things, though, that kind of flips that on its head, that a lot of people miss in a lot of cases, especially at the enterprise level, is that not rolling out IPv6 doesn't protect you from IPv6 security flaws, right? Because you've got Telecom and now I can't say the other protocol, but you've got auto-configuring protocols that are actually running IPv6 over your v4 network. And so if you're doing even DPI, right, on a v4 packet, you don't see this v6 packet that's stuck inside of there. And so I think security and resilience here are big pieces of the puzzle. I don't think that there's a clear-cut, one-size-fits-all mold that everyone falls into, but it's definitely something that needs to be thought about. And I think more and more people are thinking about it. Unfortunately, in a lot of things with networking, security is an afterthought anyway.
Jan?
The way I think to roll those two together, one of the things that our experience has been is that clearly there is not the diligence in testing going into the v6 stacks and implementations in even in very mainstream, well-known vendors' products, and I think there's a real concern there. There's not the installed base necessarily of the v6 functionality that's finding the bugs out in the wild, so. There's clearly going to be implementation problems that are just waiting for people to find and exploit. It's going to, it's not as mature a protocol. The implementations are not as mature. It's going to take some years to get there.
So you're using IPv6 only in your transport part of the network, right? So you ever requested the security feature parity from the vendor?
Security feature parity of v4 or
with v4 to have same level of security in v6.
So I mean, my point there is about the implementations of the stacks,
Okay.
BGP transport over v6 or whatever it happens to be. That these things we're seeing just in very basic functionality. Some fairly glaring bugs, which I would take as a sign of this is not really being tested or this has not been deployed that widely, so these bugs are not being found. I think it's a fairly easy extrapolation of that to say that the security elements of these things are not going to be tested either.
Okay, and this brings us to the next question, and I would like to start with you, Ian. So what is the impact of IPv6 implementation on security and resilience on providers' network in terms of security advantages of this technology, of potential issues concerning security, on what problems remain similar to v4 or different issues? I don't know if you had any issues during your proof of concept with migration phase or something like this.
I mean, we don't. Well, with the way we're building, we don't really have a migration phase at this stage because it's very much tied into our fiber rollout. But v6 specific security problems or. In all honesty, no, I can't think of anything that we've really hit. But I mean, if you look at the way we're evolving this, and a lot of the things that we want to do, that we need to do around the data center, around the virtualization of the data center and things, OpenStack particularly, it's just not there yet. If you wanted to run a pure v6 native implementation of OpenStack, there's a lot of interfaces there, there's a lot of parts of it that are missing. And, I mean, this one, as and when that does get ready, and, I'm hopeful that it won't be too far away, we're going to have to really look at these data center architectures and see, how is this all going to fit together, because there's so many new things in there, and v6 is only one of the parts of it, but, that's going to really have to, going to need some serious auditing.
How did you tackle with, I don't know, for example, legal interception interface?
So how will we tackle that? So the simple point is that for, I mean, I've had this discussion a couple of times today, actually, as it turns out. A lot of architectures at the moment, people are saying, okay, well, you require choke points, you require, points that the traffic is passing through, and you can say, okay, that's where I'm going to do my LI, which is fine. But it means that is a choke point in the network, and it's something that you've got to scale. Now, at any one time, there will be a very small number of people that actually have any kind of legal intercept request against them. So, what we've said is, if you're going to do this, if there is the court order comes in to do this, well, what you do is you take that traffic and you place it in a tunnel to your legal interception architecture. The rest of the people's traffic, if they're peer-to-peer or whatever it is, you don't want to have to send it through that choke point, because you've got to scale the choke point in order to be able to fulfill that. So as and when the court order comes in, you say, okay, we'll take this port, we'll pipe it to the legal intercept infrastructure, and you can deal with it that way.
And then the people on the other end of the tunnel needs to understand that traffic, otherwise tough luck.
the people in the...
In the police and on the other
Yeah,
end
okay,
of the-
but I mean, but what you know, that request is going to say, okay, we want, you know, maybe a complete copy of that user's data, or, you know, everything that's, so fine. That gives you an architecture where you can do that, but only, you know, when the court order arrives to tell you to do it.
So yeah, there's lots of work needs to be done in this area. So Chris, back to the original question, impacts IPv6 implementation.
Sure. So I think that a lot of the things as far as impact are at least for simply we can kind of wrap up everything we talked about for expectation and push that into the real world, and we're actually starting to see that happen, right? So to the points earlier, one of the biggest things, right, as far as threats to security and resiliency with IPv6 is the fact that the IPv6 stacks are ridiculously immature, and that, you know, we've had how many, you know, 20, 30 years of really banging on v4 software where it works pretty well now. And v6 is just getting put in front of, you know, large amounts of users and just starting to see high levels of traffic and these kind of things where, you know, this equipment and this code is brand new. And so there's a very good chance that you're going to run into some kind of bug in some kind of equipment that you roll out if you have to change it for a v6, right? Whether it's a new software load or a new piece of equipment, there's probably going to be something wrong just because it's new, right? It's not necessarily related to v6 at all. There's been problems with the number of routers and switches and CMTSs and VRASs and all kinds of things that weren't necessarily had anything to do with v6, but the fact that changing the IP stack, you know, in a router in particular, right, in an IP-based device, you know, that's its whole function. You basically touch every piece of code in that box, and that's a big job, and that's something that apparently is not being QA'd as well as we would have hoped, right,
So-
in a lot of major vendors.
So the only way is learning as we go.
Yeah,
learning
as we
and
go.
fixing as we go.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a natural process, right? I mean,
So
that's just a natural
if
process.
we don't go, we can't learn and fix things.
Absolutely, and definitely, I mean, if you're rolling something out, whether it's v6 or any other new technology, new protocol, hopefully you can set up a lab and do a little bit of testing, run a pilot program in your network before you roll it out, you know, to 10,000, 100,000, a million customers. You know, try it out, you know, paint a spot that can't be seen, and then move forward. But I think that, you know, it's just another piece of common sense. It just so happens that IPv6 is the waste of the hourglass, and so changing it changes everything.
So don't
In
be
some respects.
don't be afraid to break some glass.
Right, don't be afraid to break some glass. Yeah, have some test glass. You know?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. So Bartek.
From one hand, I can agree with Chris that there are lots of issues. For example, I'm working in also part-time in a NOC, and I am still very surprised how many pieces of software, even the latest version, are not IPv6 enabled, which we are using in our NOC. So we have to figure out what else we can use, how we can deal with this. Hopefully, we don't have very many so far customers, so we have time for playing, for testing different solutions, different cases, and things like that. But on the other hand, from the backbone side of the network, I don't see much issues. It's just running. So from this point of view, we can feel good. Yeah.
I fully agree that we should start now testing and trying some solutions to learn how to get the implementations which are more secure and resilient. I was interested, do we have now any evidence of incidents, let's say security incidents from IPv6 world? And as a matter of fact, there's a little of this information available. It doesn't mean that there's no problem at all, but some data you can obtain are very interesting, because I was asking if probably those known threats or types of attacks known from IPv4 attacks are still valid in IPv6 environment, probably DDoSes. And so I went to Arbor Networks reports and learned that they report that only 4% of customers, their customers or respondents encountered the DDoS attacks. Is it much or not? Rather not, but compare the traffic, IPv4 traffic compared to IPv6. So maybe now there's a point when we can learn, because there are attacks, maybe they are not very serious, maybe they are not big amount of this, but they exist. Another example is from one of the American companies that published the report. They have many customers, they are using IPv6. And the most popular, let's say, attack or security incident is coming from the coexistence between IPv4 and IPv6. Because there will be the transition phase from one technology to another, and during this phase probably there are so many important threats we have to address, like for instance all those tunneling technologies that can pose the security flows of holes across the firewalls. They are not aware of this, and so on. So the tunneling technologies or translating technologies, all those are, everybody knows from years that there's a possible security flow. But yeah, the attacks exist now. So those threats or vulnerabilities are used by underground now to maybe they are also testing the possibilities. So
Yep.
from our perspective is just also learn how to combat with this.
Anyone has any data on this, on security incidents on V6? No? Okay.
A question, you were talking about Docsis 3.0, and is there any kind of V6 firewalling or anything that's on by default as part of that spec?
There's nothing V6 specific for sure. It's all kind of treated the same. To harken back to the last panel, there's basically a BCP38 function built in to Docsis 3.0, which is, they call it source address verification, which is, to David's point, just a simple filter, right? If I didn't give you this address, you can't send traffic from it. Sure. But as far as firewalling, there's not much. So that's left up to the customer device again. What we're seeing though is interesting. A lot of cable companies now are rolling out actual CPE more and more so, which I think is more closer to the European model and more towards the DSL model. In large part to upgrade to Docsis 3.0 for one reason, and another part is to get IPv6 involved. And then the other thing is then they actually have a firewall in the home that they can control to some extent, or at least know that it's there, right, so that their customers don't get infected.
Yeah, I mean, there's some work going on in the ITF to discuss default policies and those kind of things, because I mean there is a potential hole here, of V4 firewalling and things. This is all well established. You could have all of that, and your V4 front door is triple bolted, but your V6 windows are wide open. It's quite possible that can happen.
Okay, and actually this brings us to our two questions. So we have been discussing this BCP38, anti-spoofing, and all that stuff. It seems that it's not getting much ground, but if we are building the IPv6 networks, these are new networks, we probably should think of implementing BCP38 and anti-spoofing mechanisms while we are building the new networks, right? Do you guys see any actual usage of BCP38 in IPv6 builds?
Shall I go first on that? I mean, from the way we've designed TerraStream, it's not just an afterthought. It's kind of fundamental to how the whole thing works. customers are identified by their V6 address, or one particular prefix that's allocated for them. That's going to be there throughout the life of their contract. So you know that customer belongs to that, and so this is the basis of an ACL for there. Again, for different traffic types that we're identifying, those are going to be based on the prefixes, the source and the destination prefixes. ACLs will enforce that. So it's not just a kind of well, we might put that on if we think about it. It's fundamental to how we're going to architect our services. So
you actually pre-built this in the architecture of the network?
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you've got your addressing architecture planned out from day one, this is how you're going to build your network, you can turn that into exceedingly simple, replicable ACLs that exist on every port of every device. And you don't end up in this situation where you've got 15,000 ACL entries on there and things, you've got no idea what's going on. It becomes, very, very small, very, very easy to monitor, and, through configuration checking, you can ensure that those things are in place. And as long as you've taken this into account from day one, rather than, in 3 years' time thinking, oh, maybe we should have done that.
This is actually a great message. So guys, you heard, if you're building a new IPv6 network, think about this from the day one. Anyone else want to take on this?
I don't have anything specific to BCP38 and IPv6. I think that I'd just like to echo, though, that statement that you are building a completely new logical network when you roll out IPv6, right? I mean, and there's a lot of synergies, there's a lot of things you can reuse, and there's a lot of, it's not all the work, but you really are building a new logical network. And so whatever security flaws or resiliency problems or scaling issues you have in your current V4 network, you don't have to propagate those over, right? You can build a better network on the same physical infrastructure, and with the mind that eventually V4 will become less important, and in 15, 20 years you may be able to turn it off, depending on who you are. But you get this chance now to build V6 right from day one. So, really put your engineering hat on tight and go to work and make this happen and make it look right? I mean, why not?
So you don't have to propagate them over, or you should not propagate them over, or must not?
You don't have to. The rest of it is up to you.
Okay, any more comments?
No, it's a good idea, because all the time when you have the network which is built 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you have only the excuse. I cannot implement some mechanism because it's too complex. But you are right, and this point should be, more, advertised, let's say, to the community, because it is an opportunity.
Yeah, you're building something new.
That's right.
Yeah. So okay, let's touch briefly about the routing table. So V4 routing table is exploding because of various different reasons. But on IPv6, BGP routing table is not exploding yet. So I did a little bit of calculations. I'm running a lab with 3 upstreams, with 3 different providers, with BGP, AS number, and all that. And I did some simple math. Actually, that was a shell script that went through the whole table. And I found that 218 ASNs are already announcing more specifics. So, should or can we prevent this?
Those are different questions. And I think just at kind of a high level, right? I mean, a significant portion of the V4 deaggregation is misconfigurations and stuff people don't know what they're doing, right? I mean, probably, I don't know if I can say most of it, but a very large chunk of the BGP routing table is cruft, right? It's stuff that doesn't have to be in there. But there's also a very significant amount of stuff that really is useful for some measure of useful for some network operator in some area, right? So a lot of it's traffic engineering. For whatever reason, it comes down to that's just the way they're going to do it. And so I think we're going to see that at least carry over to V6. What we can hopefully do, and what we should absolutely do, is not carry over all of the extra stuff, right? Not have people's routing policies that are just broken carried over to V6 that propagate routes all over the place just because they can, or because they don't know any better, right? So I think we'll still see some. You're not going to see just perfect aggregates all the way down, right? You're going to see some breakups for all kinds of reasons. But hopefully it won't be as bad as before, and it's another thing where we just have to talk to each other. And the same thing we did with before. Again, we kind of have that reset button where we can start and if you slap people early, maybe they won't do it again.
So actually, I'm a bit observing the routing table through time, and I saw these weird jumps. Right? I had a look, and there was continuously coming new prefixes in the routing slots. They announced, for example, /32, and then all the /48s under /32. And then in like an hour or two or a day, the whole thing disappears and just /32 is there. But then 2 or 3 days later, somebody totally else, so totally different guy, does the same thing. So is there, I don't know, a fairy going around telling these people, don't do that, or how do we tackle this? Should we call these people that do these things and do the mistakes? What?
Yeah, well, I mean, and there already is the CIDR report, right, that goes out onto the NANOG mailing list at least. I don't know if you have similar thing. I assume it goes out to other mailing lists around the world. Right, I mean, it was called CIDR because it started a long time ago.
Yeah, okay.
And I actually don't know if it's even, I haven't watched it for a while, so I haven't been operating a network in a few years, so I haven't actually watched that list. So I don't even know if it's added V6. It hasn't yet? Okay. But I mean, something like that for V6, absolutely, I think would make a lot of sense. And that's the way you do that, right? You call it out where it's, this weekly email that comes out and says, hey, why is your company doing this? They do it is in V6 now? Okay.
Anyone has any?
I was just wondering, I mean, you've probably got more knowledge about RIPE than I have, but of the RIPE LARs, are there any figures published about how many of the people who have V4 space have actually made V6 applications? And do we know what kind of percentage that's running at?
Okay, Dave. You have been blocked by an ACL. Okay.
Just to respond to that quickly, there's IPv6 ripeness, which was an initiative to give LIRs a series of stars. And you'd achieve those stars by doing all sorts of things like applying for an allocation, making assignments out of it. So yes, if you have a look, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, go and have a look at who have the most stars in IPv6 ripeness, and that gives you some kind of indication of deployment based on allocations requested, space requested.
Yeah, and when they were collecting the ideas, because they had 4 stars, and they were collecting the ideas who to give the 5th star, my suggestion was call that LAR or ISP to their help desk and say, I have an IPv6 problem. And depending on if the response is, yeah, sure, how can I help you? Then there we go, 5th star. Otherwise, nope. So, okay, I hope that there are some questions from the audience. Are there any questions? Some further discussion? Sander is reading his email. General.
Well, in general, from our perspective, as we are from Orange, Poland, actually I'm just listening to this discussion from different perspective, right? Because we finished a job in mobile part. Every SIM card is IPv6 enabled. You can just buy a prepaid one, and if you have CPE, I don't know, Android, you can try IPv6 now. Moreover, I bring some devices like router. It's already running, so anyone can connect and check how CLAT and IPv6 is working in live network. So, well, of course, threats are not only related to tech guys, what will happen with BGP, whatever. But we notice that people, ordinary customers, subscribers, afraid of IPv6. I mean, human being afraid of changing something in his life. So we have to remember that IP is not the main interest for the subscriber. Subscriber only needs access to content, right? So we just follow with this strategy. We noticed that when we just put some information before the commercial start to some groups of internet users, we noticed that they are afraid of changing. Even the guys who supposed to be tech guys that they like new things, they were afraid of using IPv6 for some unknown reason. So we have to remember that we have to split those two things. We can, of course, talk about IPv6 on technical level, but the customer shouldn't actually be informed, because it could be effect of some kind of problems for him, right? He's afraid of IPv6. What is IPv6? It can generate many problems to operators, because some of them could call to the customer care and ask, what is the IPv6? What I can do with IPv6? So from operator point of view, we were working on content access. So all services nowadays which are popular, like Skype, Hangout, Facebook, Messengers, all variants of those applications. There are applications for PC, for mobile phones, right? So then we find a target, which was Android. We focus on that. Thankfully, Lorenzo was actively working as well, so you too as well. So together we bring something which is working on native IPv6 correctly, and typical user, subscriber don't even have to bother what his IP, no matter, right? If this is IPv4 or IPv6, if he is on NAT 6.4 or I don't know, carrier grade NAT, doesn't make any sense to him, right? He needs the same level of access to the internet, and that's all. So, thank you.
Okay, anyone want to comment?
Not specifically to that, but just kind of in that same line, right? I think one of the things we can prevent, or we can keep ourselves from doing, that they can definitely put a huge damper in IPv6 adoption, is the disable IPv6 as a troubleshooting tip. Just, I was talking about call centers and customer interactions and things. There was definitely some of that went on, right, at World IPv6 Day and launch even, where there was some folks who were saying, okay, well, the easiest thing to do if a customer has a problem is just to tell them, give them the step-by-step instructions on how to go into whatever machine they're using and turn v6 off. The problem there is that then that person has no idea how to turn it back on, because to your point, right, they can follow instructions on the phone with the help desk, but they're not going to go back in and reverse those steps on their own at some point for any reason, right? And so, just little things like that are things that I think, the details that need to be paid attention to really make sure that you're not getting in your own way. That PCOP help desk document could probably help with that quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see this document as it evolves. I mean, I've not never had any personal experience of being on the end of a support call, trying to make those kind of support calls, but I think it would be a pretty dire experience at the moment for most users if they ever have to do that.
So how is DT approaching this help desk issue?
So I mean, essentially, we've trained the guys. The guys who are supporting the things. We're in a lucky position actually, because it is a single protocol network that we're running. It's just not, it's an IPv6 network. So, complexity and costs are always going to be greatest whilst you're running two protocols, and you've got to go through that thing of saying, well, let's eliminate one so that we can fix the other. There's always going to be, that uncertainty about, well, what are you actually using as your transport protocol? If we've just got v6 here, then that's what we're training people to support. The v4 overlay service is a very, very specific and very, very bounded way of doing this kind of thing. So you can say, well, have you got an address here? Have you got something at the concentrator? If that stuff works, we know you've got a service. We know where we can, take traces, whatever it happens to be, to see what's going wrong. So, yeah, I mean, people are new to this. They haven't got 10, 15 years of experience with it, but they are at least, you know, doing that solely now, and they're moving in that direction.
So being experienced operator yourself, would you like to contribute?
I'll certainly have a look at the document if you'd like to send it to me. I don't wanna
Okay, but I have a question. You're a mobile operator and you're turning on IPv6. How did you approach this help desk, telling people at the help desk how to react if people is using PDPv6 and have problems probably with Skype and everything else? So how did you prepare this stuff?
Well, like I said before, we're starting with smartphones mainly. This is based on Android. This is Xperia family, Xperia Z, Z1, and Z Ultra. They look, all of them, almost the same. Typical user doesn't even know he is using IPv6. This information is hidden in the menu among APN settings. So if there is some geek who would like to check his APN, of course you can just click and check that, oh my goodness, this is not internet as usual from 10 years. I have internet IPv6. That's the APN name we are using.
So you are now shipping the devices out with IPv6 preset?
Yes, some of them are already produced with CLAT and IPv6. For some of them, there will be a released photo update over the years. So the user will see that new software is ready for him. He is downloading the software and becoming IPv6 subscriber as some kind of a transition method.
And I saw in some beta builds that you can also select the protocol version for roaming and for
yes, that was a very hot discussion with Lorenzo. I was trying to push him to extend this APN settings by giving the option to skip to different APN. This is how it works for Google products like Nexus. Nexus, when the APN is not available in particular network, is skipping to another APN on the list. But Android implementation among the vendors are not the same. So for Sony it doesn't work. You get stuck in the roaming, so we have to quickly find a workaround to get the customer happy in the roaming. Unfortunately, our survey via InfoCentre was a disaster. I mean, maybe 30% of all the respondents from the 400 roaming partners says, okay, we have IPv6. 70% says we are not ready either with the network part like SGSN, or we are not ready with the billing part. So we simply disabled IPv6 in roaming, waiting for better times. Nowadays, we left IPv4 roaming field. So the user is using IPv6 at home PLMN. Whenever he goes to VPLMN, he is using IPv4. This is a little trick we did in our IP core.
So you disabled V6 roaming, so you're actually actively preventing me now to use my IPv6 to roam back to Slovenia.
You are welcome in Orange. If you have IPv6 APN, you can use it in Orange. We are not. This is only for our customers.
Ah, okay.
That's of course not a very good solution, because we have to deploy two same APNs with the same name but with the different PDP types. This could be done in our core. It works fine. But I was expecting Lorenzo actually to extend this menu by adding not only PDP type for roaming. Let's add one field, extensional APN for roaming, right? Then you can switch, you can play, you have full options to configure in one place, which is of course for the customers the best thing, not to play with the settings in the menu. But nowadays, IPv6 is not available for the basic APN in roaming for Orange customers, Orange Poland customers, because there is no sufficient way of logic how to fall back to different APN.
Yeah. So it's interesting times working for the mobile operator deploying IPv6.
Yes, it's very interesting. Of course, our company is preparing themselves to be ready for the first IPv6 customers. So the customer care exactly knows what to do, what to check, how to check the subscriber. Our billing also is prepared for that, so you can see that the user is using internet IPv6. And let's say the consultants are not, they shouldn't tell the customer, oh my goodness, you are using IPv6. Mm-hmm. You are lost, right? But of course, like I said, we are ready. We will see in the future. Those terminals are not cheap, so not many customers buying them, so we have to wait a little bit, maybe 2 months or 3. Mm-hmm. We will see.
Thank you. It's all good stuff. People is working on it.
Could I just ask a question there about, so once you've got V6 connectivity out to your customers, do you then plan to enable customer-facing services to dual stack those internally as well, or do you just see it as being providing V6 transport connectivity to customers?
Together with Michael, our IP core specialist, we decided that we are not doing any dual stack in mobile. We decided 2 years ago, which was a little bit maybe crazy, that we are going to native IPv6. 2 years ago, even the CLAT does not exist, or we don't know about this feature. So actually, we were thinking how to override this IPv4 littlers, right? Our NAT was not able to do it. But nowadays, it was a good decision because we didn't spend money for licenses for dual stack. Moreover, our IP core is changing. We're changing the vendor for IP core, so we want to spend sufficient amount of money and to have native IPv6. So we just do it with no enormous amount of money. But hopefully we were not only the ones, so the CLAT was, I don't know, invented. And it works almost like native IPv4. Of course, you can find some services, I don't know, SIP is not working, right?
Skype.
Skype is working.
V6?
Yes, there is a patch for Skype, and cool. We had a couple of discussion with Windows, very hot discussion, but they finally did it.
Okay.
But Hangout was disaster because they replaced Gtalk, which was fantastic. It has support. It was very good support, including the mixed clients when one party is IPv4, the second party is IPv6, or whatever, what you even imagine, everything was working fine. But suddenly, I noticed Hangout on new Google devices, and it was total disaster. But together with Lorenzo, we did it. So okay. It's working now. What will be tomorrow, hard to say, because they are updating it very, very often. So, well.
Okay, thank you for this update. So, well, what I heard from Lee, if I come back to this helpdesk doc, that when Time Warner Cable was looking into the helpdesk calls on the World V6 Day, there were more wrong number calls than IPv6 calls. So this turns that this is a mental state of people don't want to go there. So, but I think, how are we time? We done?
We
okay.
are run out
so,
of time.
Yeah. Any closing remarks? Anything you want to tell people on the stream, in the room?
I mean, I think, you know, across the course of the day, I think I've said pretty much everything that, you know, that I've got to say about this. Yeah, I think it's fairly self-evident that the protocol's time has come. Okay, it's maybe not as mature as what's gone before, but the critical mass is now here. You know, and that maturity, you know, through deployment, through usage, it's going to come quickly. So, you know, we've heard a lot of excuses. I've heard these things inside our business, and I've heard them from, you know, from all over the place. But I think the excuses are becoming thinner and thinner. You know, you know, there's really, you know, answers, and there's proof that those excuses are, you know, are not barriers for deployment. So, you know, get on and do it.
Okay. I think today we definitely talked about a little bit of the warts and some of the things behind the curtain for IPv6. But I just want to make sure that doesn't discourage anyone, right? I think that the only thing that we can do to fix all of these things is to continue to deploy and to continue to move forward. So I guess, you know, the closing remark would be go forth and deploy IPv6.
I think that IPv6 is a time that everybody can say that IPv6 is not nothing new, and it's time that everybody can be ashamed not thinking about IPv6.
Okay, I think we should think about more and more initiatives to help people deploy the IPv6. I think that this idea to produce the RIPE 554 document and to help people just have idea if I'm compliant with IPv6 or not. You probably know that there are some people who are building the testing tools. As a basis, it's a RIPE 554 document, and they're building testing tools when everybody can run the test, how my equipment or the vendor equipment is compliant with IPv6, because people sometimes are not aware to which level they are compliant or not. So an initiative that can help people to be involved and check something, test something, we should think.
So, Sander, did you hear this? There is a request to build a testing tool to test the RIPE 554 compliancy. How do we?
Actually, I have to look at that stuff. I also looked at the IPv6 ready stuff, so maybe we can combine something here.
Yeah, let's see how we can work on it. It would be actually cool to have a test suite that tests all the stuff that we did. Okay, thank you very much. I would really like to thank you to all four the panelists, and I'm taking it over to Dan that will close down the day. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all. I'm just going to close because we're at the time to get ready for the social and for events that are here, to just say thank you all for coming here. Thank you to those who have been watching us live. We've seen people throughout the day watching, and we thank you all for being here at this ION Krakow event. And please do check out our website. It's www.internetsociety.org/deploy360. We're here to help you. Jan, you've seen, myself, Megan Cruz, who's been off over there, and Chris now joining our team as well. We're here to help you get IPv6, DNSSEC, and routing technologies deployed. So please, we're here. Let us know how we can help you. And let's just get out there and get this stuff deployed.